Hi, this is David Dickens, and today we are talking about protecting your heirs from themselves. A really good academic study that just came out. I'm going to give you a little bit of detail on that and then try to give you 3 or 4 actionable ideas that might help you if you're concerned about your heirs blowing through their inheritance quickly. I'll go get Walter, and we'll get started.
Back on another edition of Cover Your Assets, KC. Walter Strold here alongside David Dickens, of course, President, Wealth Advisor at Creative One Advisors Group, serving you throughout the Kansas City area and beyond. You can find us online at creativeoneadvisorsgroup.com. And a great topic today. Looking forward to talking a little bit about protecting heirs from themselves. I love the headline today and looking forward to diving into that. But first, David, how's life treating you so far this April?
It's good. I just tucked my 92-year-old in-laws onto an airplane to head back to Colorado. We had a nice week-plus long visit with them. And, a good reminder that the people that came before you can still be really entertaining and really fun and just kind of fun to hang out with. So I played more card games than you can imagine, Walter.
Oh, that's awesome. What's your card game of choice with them?
Well, not necessarily to say a bad word online, but we play a game called Oh Hell.
Oh, I've never heard of that one.
It's pretty entertaining and pretty easy for everybody to pick up, and it creates a lot of table excitement all the way throughout.
That is very cool. My grandmother, who passed last year, loved rummy. And so whenever she would come to the beach and visit my parents and I, for when I was still living with them, and then for many, many years after that, when she would still do her weekly trip down to visit mom and dad, we started a long, long time ago the tradition of playing rummy, and it would be a week-long tally. It wouldn't just be one game or each night. No, it was from the first game of the visit all the way till the last night. We would keep this enormous long-term score, and then the winner got to take this little card trophy home.
Oh, that's awesome.
And hold on to it for the year until the next year's activity. So she loved playing rummy, and all the way up before, just a few months before she passed, we were still squeezing in a rummy game whenever we would get a visit in. So
that's terrific.
Yeah,
that is terrific.
So I love that. So I know exactly what you're describing. The joy of being able to play cards and laugh and to do that at their age is also amazing and such a blessing. So that's really
very
cool.
Very good. Yep.
Awesome. Well, we're talking again about protecting heirs from themselves on today's show, and this jumped out to you, David, because you saw some new data, a study come out that was a little bit shocking, I'm guessing, when you saw the number here.
Yeah, so there were researchers at Texas Tech and University of Alabama, and they did a study of heirs. The particular group they studied were heirs greater than 50 years old.
Okay.
They had an average inheritance of $133,000. So, maybe that was 4 kids splitting $500,000 or $600,000 or something like that. The thing that caught my eye was 42% of heirs spend all of their inheritance within year 1.
Wow.
And I thought, and that kind of lines up with some of the conversations that I've had in my office over the years with parents who were nervous about, a common discussion was, I'm not worried about 2 of my kids, but that third one is going to blow it immediately. So that's what caught my eye here. We don't know why people blow through that kind of money, in their first year of inheritance. Maybe they had medical bills that were sitting on a back shelf that they couldn't do anything with, or maybe they paid off some debt, which wouldn't be a horrible thing to spend your inheritance on unless you reaccumulated that debt in the coming years. Maybe they made a big splurge. Who knows? The piece I read didn't discuss that. But obviously with 42%, it's fairly common that that happens. So what we want to do today is, first of all, not give estate planning advice specifically to any of our listeners or tax advice. But this comes up pretty often in my office as a financial advisor. And so what I want to do is communicate 3 or 4 ways that I have seen clients put certain structures into place which helps protect their heirs from themselves, spending it all down quickly. So that's where we're going today.
Love it. I think this will be a great breakdown and really interesting to explore the reasons why. Anything else from that study jump out to you? What else did you take as a big takeaway before we get into all the nitty and gritty and analysis of this?
Well, they gave some very basic demographics as to who these people were. So it wasn't a bunch of 20 and 30-year-olds that inherited this money. I found it interesting that the heirs that they studied were older than 50. So you would think that at that point, either you're well on your way to securing your own retirement or you're unlikely to get there. So that told me something about the 42% that immediately spent it all. They were probably way behind, or maybe in a hole that they used this money to get out of. I will say over my years in the business, I've seen people who had a hole that they needed to fill. Once they got it filled, they found it very difficult not to dig the hole again. So, whether it's brains being wired in a different way than mine is, it's just kind of hard to understand what some people do with their money. But it was pretty interesting. A couple of other interesting little side bits. 42% spent it all. 43% saved it all. So only
it's like two extremes then.
Exactly. And only 15% spent some and saved some.
Wow. That's really quite a fascinating takeaway.
Yeah, I thought that was as well. So it just got me to thinking, there are a number, obviously I know a lot of our listeners for our podcast, and I have no idea who a lot of you are, but this is a really common topic of conversation for people especially in their 70s and 80s, but even with people who have done really well, their kids are in their 20s and 30s, and this particular couple or three that I'm thinking of are already thinking, well, what if I die young and they get way too much money in their 20s? They have to make some sort of plan now, which can be easily revised as time goes on and the kids get older, unless they do some sort of, irrevocable trust of some sort. So I will say that every situation, it's kind of cute to say, oh, every situation is different. But in this part of planning, pretty much every situation is different. And the estate planning attorney you go to, hopefully, will have seen a lot of different situations, and they can write up pretty much anything you can think up in your trust. So hopefully, this 15-minute podcast will give you some things to think about, hopefully some things you haven't already thought about that might get you prepared to go in and sit down with that estate planning attorney and draft up a document that will fit really well for your heirs.
I'd like to focus a few minutes on the spenders. David, do we have any idea what that 42% spent the money on? What were they doing with all of those dollars?
That was kind of left to my imagination. And I was just, when I mentioned early on, maybe medical bills or maybe a splurge or maybe debt reduction. Yeah. Those are just situations I've seen in my office for adult children of my clients. So, 133 grand to blow through an average inheritance of 133 grand in a year. That sounds a little bit more like a splurge and not a significant debt reduction, because that would be massive debt reduction. Maybe they have a house that they just want to pay off. Okay, that's perfectly fine, especially if it's a high interest rate. Maybe they had some medical bills and a splurge tied to it. It's just kind of hard to know. There was a mention in the study that the people that blew it all, there was a thought that maybe they felt like this was money that would continue to remind them of their parents, and they just wanted to get rid of that money.
Wow, very emotional element to it.
Exactly, a big emotional tie to it. So, it's people do, as I said earlier, people do the darndest things with their money, and I think this is a perfect example of how 42% of us do crazy things with a windfall like that.
Yeah. Well, I know that's spending it all at once is certainly one way to go about it, but we could also look at the giving side. Giving it all at once is not necessarily the strategy that you have to use. There can be, and I believe this is something that you work with clients and discuss with them. Hey, do you want to give it all at once, or is there another way to go about this? Can we turn this into a long-term resource, or just kind of approach this whole inheritance conversation from a different perspective?
Yeah, exactly. So kind of the consistent theme that is discussed in my office is these clients want to turn what would be a windfall into some sort of long-term resource for their heirs. So in some way, set up a stream of cash flow instead of a massive lump sum. So, Walter, when I was thinking about this, I kind of broke it up into two main categories. Very large estates, people that are going to have estate tax problems. And right now, 2026, estate tax kicks in for a married couple with an estate greater than $30 million. If you are an individual, then it's $15 million that you can have an estate size without paying estate tax. That does not include, for instance, if you live in Minnesota, well, you're going to have state estate tax too. Kansas, Missouri, not a problem. Most states, I think there's 16 states that have their own set of estate tax rules. But most people are just going to have to worry about federal. So I want to just quickly cover one idea that I've seen in play for large estates. I've seen this with a couple of families that I work with. And that is, so they know that at some point, if they don't do anything, their heirs are going to pay estate tax. And above 30 million, every penny above 30 million, the estate tax rate is 40%. So the federal government isn't kidding around when they're going to tax your estate. There are things with irrevocable trusts, which by the name is irrevocable. The one that I've seen that the clients seem happiest with is establishing a family foundation. So through some legal documents, you establish a 501c3 organization. You gift money into that, and you can repeatedly gift more money over the years as you get closer to your, what presumed to be your date of death. And that money then is outside of your estate. So nobody's going to pay tax on that. It was a gift. Your kids can actually become officers of the family foundation or board members, and they can be compensated for their service. The IRS rule, and again, this is not tax advice for you specifically, but the rule is that the role that they play, if they're going to get paid, it has to be legitimate, it has to be necessary, and the compensation has to be reasonable. So one of your trusted professional advisors, probably a CPA, maybe your estate planning attorney, would do a study, not lengthy, to figure out, well, what is reasonable compensation? So in that way, you're giving your kids an active role in gifting your money away over the years, and they're getting compensated for their time. So that has been in fact, I'm pretty sure, in fact, I'm confident because I read Buffett's book, but Warren Buffett set up a big foundation, and his kids, a really, really big foundation. And his kids are officers of that foundation. I don't know whether they draw a salary because he gifted them a big bunch of money also. But that's one idea for very large estates in a way to avoid estate tax and give your kids some sort of cash flow, maybe some sort of meaning that they can get out of all the money that you've accumulated.
Really helpful to kind of look at that perspective. Are there additional options that are based on the size of the estate? Like if that's not a fit for everybody, are there other options available to people?
Yeah. So in my notes here, I kind of called these normal estates.
Okay.
And by that, in my client base, that's kind of an estate between $1 and $10 million.
Okay. That puts a good bracket around it.
Yeah. So super common. And those are, if you have concerns about your heirs and you want to kind of control or guide things from the grave, what you'd likely do is visit your estate planning attorney and set up a trust. That would most likely be a revocable trust that you can change any time between when you set it up and your date of death. You can't change it after you die, but that's obvious. So one type of trust is often referred to as a spendthrift trust. So if you're concerned that maybe one or a couple of your heirs might have a spending problem, usually what happens in that situation is that a trustee who you have decided upon, and I'll break that down here in just a minute, but the trustee distributes earnings from the trust, but not the principal. So the principal amount stays intact, maybe through this generation past you, and then the principal gets distributed to the next generation, or maybe it stays intact. You kind of draw it up however you think it might roll. But the trustee would distribute the earnings from that trust to the heirs that are named, maybe monthly, maybe annually. It would basically preclude them from going to buy a luxury car. They can't take it to a casino. Creditors can't get a hold of it. So if they get into debt problems, well, it's removed from what a creditor can go get. So it's really a minimum distribution in poor years. The trust, whatever it earns during those years, in a poor year, well, it's kind of a minimal distribution. But it's there to support a specific amount of lifestyle. And you, as the person who sets up the trust, gets to determine how much that is. So again, with your attorney, you can write pretty much anything into these things that you think is reasonable. I've also seen milestone distribution trusts, and this could be a component of your spendthrift trust. But let's just say that you're doing this and your children are still minors. But if you die in a car wreck and they're your heirs, you need a trust situation set up. So you might say, well, at age 21, they get 20% of the principal. And age 30, they get 40% of the remaining principal. And age 40, they get all the rest. That's one situation that I have seen written up. And so let's just say that once your kids are 24, 25, you might have your attorney adjust this slightly so that the ages line up with the heirs that you're talking about. So the real benefit here, if it's not already obvious, is your heir spends down the first 20% because they're 21 years old and they want to go buy silly stuff. They spend it down too quickly. Well, then they have a decade to mature, maybe to get settled in their career. They're unlikely to be able to live off the distribution for that 10 years, so they have to go out and get a career and hopefully build that career so that when they're 30, they get another big chunk of money and maybe they invest that instead of spending it. So, everybody's situation, like we've said, is different, but that's one way to set it up by age-based milestones.
Lots of different ways to, I guess, slice it there. That's pretty interesting. As people get maybe more mature, you hope they, putting in some netting, right, in case they fall through the first attempt.
Exactly.
Another injection later.
A little maturity safety net.
Yes, great way to put it.
And another one I've seen interesting that I've seen twice in writing in my practice, I'm going to call it an incentive trust, and there's probably a fancier name for it than that.
Okay.
But basically, it can include things like, well, if they get their undergraduate degree, they get this amount of money. And if they get their master's degree, they get this amount of money. And, maybe the donor, the adult, is particularly educationally inclined, so they get a PhD and they get this amount of money. I have clients who have children with sobriety problems. And so trying to be fairly generic here, let's just say, no client will identify themselves by what I'm getting ready to say, but let's just say you had 4 kids and you're not worried about 3 of them, but the other one has a drug problem. And you might say to the other 3, they just get their money in a lump sum, but the 4th one has a trust set up, and that heir must pass a periodic drug and alcohol test in order to get an annual distribution from the trust. And that regulating that goes back to the trustee who you choose to help oversee this money. And before I'm going to give a word on trustees, but the last one I've seen is a dollar for dollar match. So maybe what you do is whatever their W-2 income is, and maybe you do this between ages 22 and 40. So during their maturation process, whatever they earn in W-2 income, you'll double it until the money runs out. Or at age 40, they get the remainder. So what you can kind of quickly figure out here is that whatever you can figure out that you think is going to be best for your set of heirs, if you can think it up, somebody can write it up. And then it's up to a trustee to actually oversee this. So trustees tend to be family members or close family friends who, sitting here today, you say, I totally trust this person to be the fiduciary to carry out my wishes. And let's say my kids push back on this and say, oh, but I need this, that, and the other. You want a family friend or a close family member who has a pretty strong constitution, that they're going to say, nope, here's what your folks said. And here's the way we're going to do this. If you don't have a family member or a close friend, well, banks or trust companies are happy to do that for a fee. You'd probably want to compensate your family member or your close friend. It takes some time and it takes some attention, especially if these payouts are going to last for 10 or 15 or 20 years. You'd also want to have some sort of backup trustee or co-trustee. So maybe you start out with a family member, but a bank trust department or a trust company ends up being the backup trustee. Again, your family situation is probably going to determine who you choose as a trustee. Lots of choices, lots of different costs. Your family member is going to have longevity issues, but your bank or your trust company isn't. It's going to be an institutional setting where somebody is always going to be there as a backstop. So that's kind of the way I looked at this, Walter. There are so many ways to go about doing this. These are specific ideas that I've seen from my practice that have worked out well. I've certainly seen situations that haven't worked out well when there was no structure in place. So I'd encourage you, if you are remotely concerned that your heirs, one, two, or all of them, might be amongst the 42% who spend the entire inheritance in their first year, now is a great time to do some planning to make sure that the bumper guards, the guardrails are in place, so whenever you do pass on, you feel like you've set your heirs up for success.
I think that is the best part, right? It all comes down to communication, maybe just trying to get everybody on the same page. That really sets everybody up for success when that's the case versus it being a big guessing game at the end. I remember running into that with my dad, who's still with us and hopefully for a long time, but there was a time where he was just mentioning some things and he was like, since I'm an only child, he was like, well, you get it all when we pass and, just do what you think's right with it. And I was like, whoa, like, well, I mean, that's fine, but also tell me some wishes, like give me some direction, like let's talk about this a little bit. And so, then he was like, oh, well, I would love for, the church that we went to for 20 years, I'd love to just write a check and pay for new carpet in the whole church because it really needs it. And I was like, oh, great, there's one thing. Like, what other specifics you got? And so it opened up a much better conversation that way. And so that's helpful, right, to have a little direction sometimes. And whether you're doing that beyond the grave or before the grave, I think it's great.
Yeah. So if you hear that from your parents and they have an IRA and a non-IRA, I would encourage, this is not tax advice for anybody, but they can leave that taxable IRA to the church with a wish that it gets spent on new carpet instead of you getting the IRA, paying the taxes on the distributions, and then giving it to the church.
Even savvier, right?
So a little bit of planning goes a very long way to making all the assets that any particular person has accumulated over the years, to make it go to the places they want in the most tax-efficient way possible. It doesn't take a lot of planning, but it doesn't happen by itself. It's not dramatically expensive, but oftentimes it's not free. You mentioned just a minute ago exactly where I kind of wanted to leave this podcast off, and that is I would say, the vast majority of my clients do not clearly discuss their wishes with their heirs. It's kind of a tough discussion. Nobody really likes to talk about their own longevity. Heirs really don't want to hear about your own longevity and contemplating your own death. But having those conversations to clearly explain your wishes about the money, even if it is you 3 kids get every penny, but here's how your mom and I earned this money and here's what's important to us, and you'll be able to do anything you want, but here's kind of how we hope it will roll. And I have seen clients who are now clients of mine because their parents were, who the parents were concerned about. And they had that discussion before the parent died. And it's been amazing how that discussion has stuck with these adult kids over the years. So just don't discount the fact that, they're not going to listen to me. Yeah, actually, a bunch of them actually will. So the time to do that is when you're still lucid and you're still alive. So hopefully something in here has been helpful for everybody, whether it's your parent or whether you are the parent. Take some time to get these things in place before it's too late.
Very good. Great breakdown today, David. Thanks for walking us through this important conversation. Lots of intrigue based on those numbers from the study and ways to be thinking about this, as well as all the creative ways that you can pass along wealth and accumulation and to your heirs, and ways to control it, ways to give freedom, ways to give expectations. So much packed into here today. If you've not had these kinds of conversations with your advisor, and it's important to do so, hopefully we've illustrated that today, don't hesitate to reach out to David and his team at Creative One Advisors Group, again, based in Kansas City and serving you in those areas and beyond. You can get a complete planning review of your situation. They call it the CPR process, and you'll go through where the gaps might exist in your plan, both getting to retirement through it and thinking about beyond those years as well. All of that's part of the planning process and should be a topic of conversation when you come in and visit. If you'd like to find out more or set up a time to meet, you can call 913-317-1414. That's 913-317-1414, or go online to creativeoneadvisorsgroup.com. And we've got contact information in the description of today's show, so you can find it easily as well. David, I hope you have a great rest of your week, and we'll look forward to catching up with you on the next episode.
Yeah, let's do it again in 2 weeks.
All right, sounds good. Thanks for joining us, everyone. We'll see you again right back here on Cover Your Assets, KC.
Creative One Advisors Group has been proudly serving families in the Kansas City metropolitan area since 2003. Over the years, we've evolved to help meet the needs of our clients, becoming KC Financial Advisors in 2010. In November 2021, our advisory business was acquired by Creative One Wealth, LLC, C1W, and in January 2025, we officially adopted the name Creative One Advisors Group. Previous episodes were recorded under the branding of KC Financial Advisors, which has since been rebranded as Creative One Advisors Group. Any references to KC Financial Advisors should now be understood as referring to Creative One Advisors Group. Investment advisory services are offered through Creative One Wealth, LLC, a registered investment advisor. Creative One Advisors Group is a DBA of Creative One Wealth. Insurance services are offered through licensed insurance professionals. Investment advisory services are provided in accordance with the fiduciary duty of care and loyalty that includes putting your interest first and disclosing conflicts. Insurance services have a best interest standard, which requires recommendations to be in your best interest. Creative One Wealth is not affiliated with or endorsed by any government agency and does not provide tax, legal, or estate planning advice or services. Investing involves risk, including the potential loss of principal. No investment strategy can guarantee a profit or protect against loss. Neither asset allocation nor diversification can ensure a profit or guarantee against losses. None of the information contained herein shall constitute an offer to sell or solicit any offer to buy a security or any insurance product. Insurance product guarantees are backed by the financial strength and claims paying ability of the issuing company. The Creative One family of companies includes Creative One Wealth, LLC, a registered investment advisor, Creative One Securities, LLC, member FINRA SIPC, and a registered investment advisor, and Creative One Marketing, LLC. These companies share common ownership. Additional details regarding advisory services are available in our firm's ADV Part 2A and Form CRS.